Hi everyone. In our previous video we showed how to create a very simple RPA flow that creates a new sales order header inside the Oracle EBS system. In this video I would like to get into more details regarding the invocation of a service inside the flow. So to do that I will just get into the service, the RPA flow that we just created. I'll press the edit button here and this will open me the visual editor with the flow that we have created in the previous step. And let's focus on this step, the invocation of an existing service inside the service manager. So let's go to the right side and see what we have here. We have here the service name, of course, that we are using. We have here the step name inside the flow, which we can change to anything that we want. For example, just to make it more clear to the flow if we want. And then we have the service parameters section. If we'll go for a minute to the service definition inside the service manager, we will see that for this service we have 4 input parameters and one explicit output parameter that is returned from the flow. The other 3 are just the error messages that are automatically added to any service. So how these parameters are being added to the flow and what we can do to manipulate them. For the input parameters, they are just added to this section, the service parameters sections. And if we will just focus on one of them and click the edit button here, we will see that we have 3 options to manipulate or to influence these input parameters. The default option is to leave it as process input. The meaning of that is that this input parameter will also become the input parameter of the whole flow. So if we will go and focus on the node of this flow, here we also have a process input section which has the full list of all the inputs for this flow. And if we add services and we don't change the default of leaving the input parameters as the process input, they will be added here and the default values will be taken from the service definition. Of course, I can go here to any default value and override it with a different value or just remove it. Also, the outputs of each service will be added here to the list. By default, they will not be selected as visible outputs because when we add several services we get a lot of output parameters and sometimes we only want to publish out or to expose out of the RPA flow only some of these output parameters and use the others as an internal values for the flow. In our case, we do want the order number to be exposed at the end of the execution of the flow because it is an important output, so we will just select it to be visible. Now let's get back to this service and see what other options we have to manipulate the input parameters. So the first option was to leave it as process input. The second option is to select a value from a previous step and put it here and pass it here to this input parameter. To demo that we would need to have an additional step because currently we don't have a previous step, so I'll just add another service here. Let's choose the RPA create add first line service. This service adds the first line to the newly created header of the sales order. And this service gets as an input parameter the order item number that was just created previously by the creation of the header. So it needs to get the value from a previous step. So in this case, it is obvious that I need to get here, select the select value option, choose the previous step, that in our case it would be the create header, and now I can see all the input parameters of this step and all the output parameters of this step, and I can choose to take the order number and pass it as input to the create first line ordered item input parameter. And once I do that, it will also remove it from the list of the process inputs. As you can see here, now I don't have the order item here as one of the inputs because I've set it internally to get the value from the previous step. What I can see here are all the inputs that were left with being a process input. So this was the option of selecting from previous step. Another option that I have is to put here static text. This is a constant value. I can put here a constant value that I don't want to be changed in any invocation of this service, and once I set it, it will take the value from this static string, and it will be also removed from the list of process inputs because I don't need to expose it anymore. So these were the options of how we can manipulate the inputs of any service that we invoke inside an RPA flow. Now let's say a few words about this section. These are few flags which are a little bit more advanced, but what were very important, and I want to discuss it in this video. So in Service Manager we have two types of services. We have full services, which are services that are not dependent on any previous service or any open session. It means that they do a full flow, getting into the system, doing the authentication, getting to the screen that they need to be in, and doing whatever manipulation they need to do. But there are other services which we call partial services. These services are services that are dependent on a previous service. They are dependent on an open session that was created by a previous service, like the create header that we just invoked before, and they assume that this service opened the session, got into specific place, and they are continuing from this point and on. So this service, the add first line, is such a service. It is a partial service, and it needs to have an open session from a create header service. Now when we add the create header service, by default the keep alive flag here will be unselected. It means that once the service is execution, it will close the session because it doesn't know if someone else needs the session. In our case, we do need the session open for calling the next service, so we need to tell him not to close the session. To do that, we will just select the keep alive flag. This is the meaning of this flag, keeping the session open for next services. And once we are done with this session, for example in this flow, after we add the first line, we don't need the session anymore, we need to make sure that the keep alive is not selected. This would tell the service to close the session after it ends its execution. So this was the meaning of the keep alive flag. Now the two other flags goes to the error handling of the service. By default, if I don't do anything, if a service in a flow fails, it will fail the whole flow. It will just stop the flow and present the error messages that were returned by the service. If I want to change this behavior, I have two options. First one is to select the ignore error. This would mean that if this service will fail, it will just ignore the failure and go to the next step. Sometimes I need to do that. But if I want to do some manipulation when there is an error, I can select the handle error flag, and now I will get the option to decide what to do when the service succeeds, for example to continue the flow, or when the service fails. I can stop the flow, throw an error. I can decide that in this case I want to add other steps like sending a mail or calling another service or whatever I want to do in an error case. And then I can decide if I want to stop the flow, throw an error, just end the flow without an error, or maybe just to continue the flow. And to do that I will just remove the throw error step. So this gives me the option to control my error handling in case a service fails. This is the meaning of the handle error. And if I will unselect it, it will get back to its default behavior. Thank you.